Okay, let's unpack this. Picture this scenario. You're out there bow drawn, focused. You release. What's really going through your mind about that arrow? Is it all about speed? Or maybe something else? Like, what actually makes an arrow effective when it hits heavy bone?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some pretty groundbreaking research. Dr. Ed Ashby's 2008 study update, Part 1. We're going to zero in on how your arrow setup specifically interacts with what he termed the heavy bone threshold.
And crucially, how that relates to FOC front of center.
Exactly. And look, this isn't just for the experts with years under their belt. If you're new to bow hunting or if you've been doing it forever, this stuff is genuinely surprising.
Yeah.
It might change how you think about your arrows.
That's absolutely right. Our goal here really is to pull out the critical insights from Dr. Ashby's work. We're focusing specifically on optimizing arrow performance, particularly when you encounter bone.
Which can happen.
Oh, absolutely. And what's so powerful about this study is how much it pushes back against some maybe conventional wisdom in bow hunting. We're trying to cut through the clutter, give you the core findings, basically a shortcut to being really informed about what happens at impact.
Okay, so let's lay some groundwork. These terms are key. First up, FOC, front of center. What are we actually talking about here?
So FOC, yeah, it's essentially the arrow's balance point. Think about balancing like a broomstick. It balances closer to the heavy end, right?
Right.
Same idea with an arrow. FOC tells you how much of the weight is biased towards the front. And Ashby's earlier work, well, it already hinted pretty strongly that once you push FOC above 19%, you tend to see a real jump in penetration.
Okay, 19% being a kind of threshold there, too.
Sort of a turning point, yeah.
Yeah.
And to really understand this 2008 study, you need to know his specific FOC categories. He breaks it down pretty clearly.
Okay, let's hear them.
Right, so up to 12% FOC, he calls that normal FOC, pretty standard stuff. Then 12% up to 19%, that's high FOC. 19% to 30%, this is where he terms it extreme FOC or EOC.
Oh, EOC, okay.
And then anything above 30%, that's ultra extreme FOC, ultra EOC. These aren't just random labels. They're directly tied to how the arrow behaves when it hits something solid.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's FOC. Now, this other term, heavy bone threshold, it sounds pretty definitive, like a switch is flipped. You either punch through a heavy bone or you don't.
Yeah, it does sound like that, and that's a common way people think about it. Like, above X grains, you always penetrate. Below X grains, you never do.
But it's not quite that simple.
Not exactly. The heavy bone threshold, based on Ashby's data, represents an abrupt increase in the frequency of penetration. Not an absolute guarantee, but a sudden, sharp jump in your odds of success.
Ah, okay. More probabilistic.
Precisely. And that jump consistently happens right around 650 grains of total arrow mass.
650. That's a key number then.
It's a really significant benchmark. Now, there's a little bit of variation, maybe 625 grains, for a really long, skinny broadhead, like an experimental Grizzly Extreme he tested. Maybe up towards 675 for something short and wide, like a 160-grain snuffer.
So the broadhead makes a little difference to the threshold itself.
A little, yeah. But with the broadhead he tested most, that Single-Bevel 190-grain Grizzly, the threshold landed almost dead on at 650 grains. So think of 650 as the central point where your chances of breaking through heavy bones suddenly get much, much better.
Okay, that clarifies things. Now, here's where I think it gets really interesting. You hit that 650 grain mark, your odds go way up. But the study also shows the broadhead design still plays a huge role, right? Even if it doesn't shift that 650 threshold much.
Exactly. The broadhead design significantly impacts the frequency of breaching bone, especially once you're above that mass threshold. A well-designed broadhead just does it more reliably.
How so? What makes a broadhead well-designed in this context?
A big factor is mechanical advantage, or MA. A broadhead with high MA, meaning it's generally longer and narrower with a smooth profile, needs less initial force impulse to start penetrating. It conserves energy better.
So it can push longer.
That's the key. It can push longer. And Ashby found a critical MA value, 2.6. Structurally sound single-blade broadheads with sleek profiles and smooth ferrule transitions that hit or exceeded an MA of 2.6 consistently achieved a 100% breach rate on heavy bone once the arrow mass was above that 650 grain threshold.
Wow, 100%. That's definitive.
Yeah.
So MA 2.6 is another magic number.
It seems to be a really important design benchmark for single blades, yeah.
Okay, let's dig deeper into the broadhead itself. It's not just MA, right?
Yeah.
What about the actual tip?
Absolutely. Tip design is critical, both for durability, you don't want it breaking or curling on impact, and for how it handles angled hits on bone. preventing
Well,
skip.
and blows.
Exactly. This study found the Tonto tip design performed best here. It resisted skipping and held up structurally. On the other hand, conical tips, or those sort of bone breaker pyramid tips you often see, tended to induce skip more often, especially on those non-perpendicular impacts.
Okay, Talto tip for the win there. What about the blades themselves? Single versus multi-blade.
Blade configuration matters too. Single-blade broadheads generally showed a better skip angle, meaning less tendency to glance off. Among multi-blades, rigid 4 blades tended to do better than 3 blades in terms of skip angle, and generally a longer, narrower 3 or 4 blade profile is preferred over shorter, wider ones for penetration.
Makes sense, less resistance.
And then specifically for single-blade heads, the edge design itself has a really noticeable effect. We're talking single-bevel versus double-bevel.
Ah, the bevel debate. What did Ashby find?
He found a marked advantage for single bevels when hitting heavy bone. Because of the asymmetric grind, they induce rotation as they penetrate. This rotation actually helps split the bone.
Split, not smash.
Exactly. Think about splitting firewood. An axe splits along the grain. It's more efficient than just trying to hammer through it. Splitting bone uses less of the arrow's available force.
Okay, that's intuitive.
And the tests backed it up. Single bevels showed higher heavy bone penetration rates, especially if their MA was below that magic 2.6 number, and importantly, they showed greater penetration after breaching the bone compared to double bevels with the same profile.
More penetration after getting through. That seems crucial.
It really is. And there was even some limited testing that hinted multi-blade single bevels might offer a similar advantage, though more data is needed there.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, stepping back. What's the underlying physics? How does an arrow actually break bone? You mentioned pushing longer. This sounds like impulsive force.
That's exactly it. Impulsive force is the concept. It's simply the force used multiplied by the time of action. Force times time. The key isn't just hitting hard. It's applying that force long enough to overcome the bone's structural integrity. Bones are incredibly resilient, designed to flex, move, and dissipate force through surrounding tissues. All of that works against penetration.
They absorb the shock.
Right. So whether an arrow gets through depends on 3 main things. 1, the bone itself, its strength, thickness, shape. 2, the bone's ability to move and flex away from the impact. And 3, the broadhead's design, its MA, friction, and its ability to split versus smash.
Got it.
But the absolute crucial point from the study is that how long the force acts is often more critical than the peak force itself for breaching heavy bone.
Duration matters more than intensity.
In this context, yes. Think about pushing a stalled car. Quick shoves don't do much, but sustained pressure gets it rolling. The arrow needs sustained pressure on that bone.
And that's where arrow weight comes in.
Precisely. Velocity leads off incredibly fast during impact and penetration as the target resists. But mass stays constant. A heavier arrow, because of its greater inertia, simply maintains its push for a longer duration, even as its speed drops. That extended time of impulse is what overcomes the bone's resistance.
So weight equals time, essentially. Time applying force.
That's a great way to put it. It's the dominant factor in extending that critical time of impulse needed to break through.
Okay, that provides a really solid framework. Now let's talk about the actual 2008 experiment. How did Dr. Ashby set this up? What was the test rig?
The tests were conducted using a 40-pound draw weight at 27 inches bare formula silver recurve bow. Pretty modest by today's standards, which actually makes the result even more interesting.
40 pounds, okay. And the target?
They used a young adult Asian buffalo bull shot broadside from 20 yards. The reason for choosing this specific animal was its rib thickness.
How thick are we talking?
It ranged from 7.15 millimeters to about 8.1 millimeters across the chest. This closely matched the rib thickness of a really large mature bull elk.
So a good proxy for heavy North American game.
Exactly. It's worth noting, while it was an adult buffalo, it wasn't quite as massive as the absolute largest mature bulls they'd tested previously, maybe about 28% less massive in terms of bone structure, but still very representative of heavy bone challenges. And they shot 6 arrows from each test set into the left side, 6 into the right, for consistency.
Smart. And the arrows themselves, you mentioned 4 sets.
Yes, 4 distinct sets, 12 arrows in each. Critically, the external dimensions, diameter, etc. were identical except for shaft length needed for tuning. And all arrows were meticulously bare shaft tuned.
Tuning is always key.
Absolutely. And actually, Ashby mentions a neat tip for tuning. Using a high wind shear, unvented, wide two-blade broadhead is excellent for fine-tuning your dynamic spine and figuring out how much fletching you really need.
Ah, so the broadhead helps reveal tuning issues.
Exactly, and that ties into an advantage of higher FOC. It points out it generally lets you get away with smaller fletching for stable flight.
Which means less drag.
Precisely. Less drag, less wind drift, better velocity retention downrange, flatter trajectory, quieter flight. It's a whole cascade of benefits just from needing less stabilization at the back end.
Interesting. So you tune the shaft first, then figure out minimal fletching.
That's the process. You need enough fletching initially to compare field points and broadheads accurately for spine, but then you can optimize it, especially with higher FOC.
Got it. Okay, let's break down those 4 arrow sets used in the bone tests. They all use that 190-grain grizzly broadhead, right?
Correct. All use the same 190-grain single-bevel grizzly. Here are the setups. Set 1, these were the below-threshold Ultra EFOC arrows. Mass was 620 grains. FOC was way up there at 31.9%. Set 2, also below threshold, but normal FOC. Mass was almost identical, 623 grains, but FOC was only 11.8%.
Okay, wait. Sets 1 and 2, virtually the same weight, same impact energy calculated, but drastically different FOC. That's the direct comparison.
That's the absolute key comparison, yes. Designed specifically to isolate the effect of FOC when below the mass threshold. Then you have set 3. These were above threshold EFOC arrows. Mass jumped to 691 grains with 26.2% FOC. Set 4, also above threshold, these were internally footed EFOC arrows. Heaviest set at 723 grains with 25.1% FOC.
Okay, clear separation. 2 below threshold, 1 high FOC, 1 normal. 2 above threshold, both high FOC.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, when the study says penetrating the bone, what did that mean practically?
Good point. It meant the entire broadhead had to pass completely through the bone. If even a tiny part of the broadhead was still hung up in the bone, it did not count as penetration.
Strict definition, no partial credit.
None at all. It had to be a clean pass-through of the broadhead itself.
Okay, the stage is set, meticulous setup. What did the results show? Let's start with just getting through the bone, those heavy bone threshold penetration rates. What did graph 1 reveal?
The results for just breaching the bone were incredibly clear, maybe even a bit counterintuitive at first glance. Remember sets 1 and 2, both below the 650 grain threshold.
Right, the 620 grain Ultra EFOC and the 623 grain normal FOC.
They showed the exact same heavy bone penetration rate, 50%. 6 out of 12 arrows in each group made it through the rib. Identical results despite the huge FOC difference.
Wow, so FOC made no difference in getting through when below the mass threshold.
None whatsoever. Now compare that to sets 3 and 4, the ones above the 650 grain threshold, the 691 and 723 grain arrows.
What happened with that?
100% bone penetration rate. Every single arrow in both sets went through the bone.
Okay, so that's start. Below 650 grains, it was a 50-50 shot in this test, regardless of FOC. Above 650 grains, it was 100%.
Exactly. The major takeaway for breaching the threshold, arrow mass was king. FOC, whether normal or ultra-extreme, showed zero influence on the rate of penetration when below that mass threshold. Mass gets you in the door.
That is a huge finding right there. Mass gets you through the initial barrier. But like you said earlier, that's only part 1. What happens after the arrow breaks through the bone? This is where FOC comes into play, right? And where things got really surprising.
This is absolutely where FOC steals the show. When you look at the average penetration and, more importantly, the post-breaching penetration, the story completely flips.
Okay, tell me about it. Graph 2, overall average penetration.
Right. Graph 2 showed something interesting. Set 1, the Ultra EFOC arrows, the ones that only got through 50% of the time, actually had the highest overall average penetration of all 4 sets, 9.46 inches.
Wait, higher average than the heavier arrows that went through 100% of the time? How?
Because the 6 arrows from that set that did breach the bone went incredibly deep afterwards. They pulled the average way up, even with 6 arrows scoring 0 bone penetration.
Ah, okay. So those 6 successful shots must have been really impressive.
They were. Looking deeper, at graphs 3 and 4, focusing on post-breaching depth, the study described the penetration of those Set 1 Ultra EFOC arrows as amazing. The median penetration for Set 1 was even higher than its average.
Meaning more than half the successful shots went even further than 9.46 inches.
Correct. To give you specifics, 4 of those 6 successful Set 1 shots were deep double lung hits. 3 of those actually went all the way across the buffalo's thorax. 2 stuck firmly in the offside rib, and 1 penetrated the offside rib, too.
From a 40-pound bow after breaking a rib on the way in, that's remarkable.
It really is. Now, here comes the crucial comparison. The real eye-opener. Remember sets 1 and 2.
The ones with identical mass, identical impact force, same 50% breach rate, but different FOC, 31.9% Ultra EFOC versus 11.8% normal FOC.
Exactly. Their post-breaching performance was night and day. Get this. The minimum post-breaching penetration recorded for set 1 was greater than the maximum penetration recorded for set 2.
Let me process that. The worst performer of the successful high FOC arrows went deeper than the best performer of the successful normal FOC arrows.
That's what the data showed. On average, set 1's successful shots penetrated almost double the depth of set 2's successful shots, 96.2% more penetration on average.
Nearly double the depth.
And the median penetration. Even more dramatic. Over double, 115% more median penetration for the Ultra EFOC arrows compared to the normal FOC arrows after they both broke through the same kind of bone.
Wow. Okay, so let's connect the dots for everyone listening. What does this mean?
It means that while FOC didn't help get through the initial bone when below the mass threshold, it had a massive, undeniable effect on penetration once the bone was breached.
So mass for the breach, FOC for the follow-through.
That's the perfect summary. High FOC allows the arrow to maintain its path and continue driving forward much more effectively after encountering and overcoming that initial major resistance. It leads to significantly deeper wound channels.
That's incredibly powerful data. Okay, wrapping this up. What does this all mean for you, the listener, the bow hunter, whether you're just starting or you've been at this for years?
Well, for someone newer to bow hunting, I think the clearest message is the importance of that 650 grain heavy bone threshold. It's a tangible number to keep in mind. Ensuring your arrow setup has enough mass gives you that foundational requirement for reliably penetrating heavy bone, which is critical for ethical hunting, especially on larger animals. Don't sacrifice mass purely for speed if you anticipate heavy bone encounters.
Sound advice. And for the experienced hunter, maybe someone looking to really fine-tune their setup.
For the experienced hunter, this study is gold. It clearly demonstrates that once you've handled the mass requirement for breaching bone, pushing into ultra-extreme FOC territory significantly boosts that crucial post-breaching penetration.
Which translates to?
It translates to deeper wound channels, potentially hitting more vital organs, and a much higher likelihood of getting a complete pass-through, even with lighter draw-weight bows like the one used in the test. It's about designing the whole system to work together. Mass gets you through the gate. High FOC provides the horsepower once you're inside.
A synergistic effect. Yeah. Mass and FOC working together, but for different parts of the penetration process.
Exactly. They play different but equally critical roles in terminal performance.
No, so thinking about all this, the distinct roles of mass for breaching bone and FOC for driving deep afterwards. Yeah. It really prompts a final question for everyone listening. Given these findings, how might you rethink your own arrow setup? How could you potentially design it to maximize that ethical terminal performance out there in the field, no matter what kind of shot scenario you face?